Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Fraggoth Reads. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggoth, and today we're going to be reading more of Distress by Greg Egan. Let me figure out where we left off. Probably the most major thing that happened is that our protagonist... Oh, that'll be perfect. Our protagonist has had an interview with a speaking member of the Anthrocosmologists who gives him the skinny on what the Anthrocosmologists are all about, which, if I understand it correctly, is basically that there will come somebody, some person, who can more or less keep the entire universe in their head, or at least the foundational underpinnings of the universe, which, due to the observer effect, I guess, will force the universe to come into being both forward and backward through time, as though it has always been. It's all a little ooby-shooby to me. And it's ooby-shooby to our protagonist as well. And he's like, well, the danger of having of listening to such pseudoscientific stuff is that it does sound reasonable, but he's not really buying it. Violet Mosala gives him a bit of an explanation of what she's all about and what her theory of everything does. And there is some overlap that he's noticing, but at the same time, she hasn't quite told him the whole thing yet. Let's see, what else happened? Oh, right. He's able to confront Violet Mosala on whether she's emigrating to Stateless or not, and it appears that those rumors are in fact founded on reality. There are some political considerations for why she might do this, and ultimately, a lot of it would be to Stateless's benefit because if you can open up this burgeoning African market, the burgeoning African markets, then and they no longer have trade sanctions against you, then the rest of the world could possibly follow. So it would be quite a coup if she were to, in fact, emigrate. Or could be quite a coup if she were to emigrate to Stateless. That was the other thing. Yeah, I think that's about it. It's been a while, so I'm not remembering all the details. Hopefully they'll fall into place. My head is in a weird space right now. Very fuzzy-headed today. I don't know why. So let's get moving with the grooving. And we should get up to part 3 of the book today. That is the plan. All right, give me 1 sec to get some more water in my parched throat, and we will continue reading from Distress by Greg Egan. Chapter 17. I was woken by a call just after 4, the ringing growing louder and more shrill until it reached into my melatonin dreams and turned the darkness of my skull inside out. For an instant, the mere fact of consciousness was shocking, unspeakable. I was outraged as a newborn child. Then I stretched out an arm and groped around on the bedside table for my notepad. I squinted at the screen, blinded for a moment by its brightness. The call was from Lydia. I almost refused to take it, assuming that she'd somehow miscalculated the time zones, but then I woke sufficiently to realize that it was the middle of the night for her, too. Sydney was only 2 hours behind Stateless, geographically, if not politically. She said, "Andrew, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought you had a right to hear this in real time." She looked uncharacteristically grim, and though I was still too groggy even to speculate about what was coming next, it was obvious that it wasn't going to be pleasant. I said hoarsely, "That's okay. Go ahead." I tried not to imagine what I looked like, gaping, bleary-eyed at the camera. Lydia seemed to be in a darkened room herself, her face lit only by the image on the screen. Of me, lit only by the image of her. Was that possible? I suddenly realized that I had a pounding headache. "Junk DNA is going to have to be re-edited, with the Landers story removed. If you had time, of course I'd ask you to do it yourself, but I'm assuming that's not possible. So I'll give it to Paul Costas. He used to be one of our newsroom editors, but he's freelance now. I'll send you his final cut, and if you strongly disagree with anything, you'll have an opportunity to change it. Just remember that it's being screened in less than a fortnight." I said, "That's fine, that's all fine." I knew Costas. He wouldn't mutilate the program. Why, though? Was there some legal glitch? Don't tell me Landers is suing. "No. Events have overtaken us. I won't try to explain. I've sent you a trailer from the San Francisco Bureau. It'll all be public by morning, but—" She was too tired to elaborate, but I understood. She didn't want me to learn about this as just another viewer. A quarter of junk DNA, and some 3 months' work on my part, had just been rendered obsolete, but Lydia was doing her best to salvage some vestige of my professional dignity. This way, at least I'd stay a few hours ahead of the masses. I said, "I appreciate that. Thank you." We bid each other good night, and I viewed the trailer, a hastily assembled package of footage and text, alerting other newsrooms to the story and giving them the choice either to wait for the polished item soon to follow or to edit the raw material themselves and put out their own version. It consisted mainly of FBI news releases, plus some archival background material. Ned Landers, his 2 chief geneticists, and 3 of his executives had just been arrested in Portland. 9 other people, working for an entirely separate corporation, had been arrested in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Laboratory equipment, biochemical samples, and computer records had been taken from both sites in pre-dawn raids. All 15 people had been charged with violating federal biotechnology safety laws, but not because of Landers' highly publicized neo-DNA and symbiont research. At the Chapel Hill laboratory, according to the charges, workers had been manipulating infectious, natural RNA viruses, in secret, without permission. Landers had been footing the bills, circuitously. The purpose of these viruses remained unknown. The data and samples were yet to be analyzed. There were no statements from the accused. Their lawyers were counseling silence. There were some external shots of the Chapel Hill laboratory sealed off behind police barricades. All the footage of Landers himself was relatively old material. The latest was cannibalized from my interview with him, not completely wasted after all. The lack of detail was frustrating, but the implications already seemed clear. Landers and his collaborators had been constructing perfect viral immunity for themselves, beyond the specific powers of any one vaccine or drug, beyond the fear of mutant strains out-evolving their defenses, while engineering new viruses capable of infecting the rest of us. I stared at the screen, which was frozen on the last frame of the report. Landers, as I'd seen him in the flesh myself, smiling at the vision of his brand-new kingdom. And though I balked at accepting the obvious conclusion, what possible use could he have had for a novel human virus, except for some kind of thinning? I sprinted to the bathroom and brought up the meager contents of my stomach. Then I knelt by the bowl, shivering and sweating, lapsing into micro-sleeps, almost losing my balance. The melatonin wanted me back, but I was having trouble convincing myself that I was through vomiting. Pampered hypochondriac that I was, I would have consulted my farm at once if I'd had it, for a precise diagnosis and an instant optimal solution. With visions of choking to death in my sleep, I contemplated tearing off my shoulder patch, but the symbolic attempt to surrender to natural circadian forces would have taken hours to produce any effect at all. And then it would have rendered me, at best, a zombie for the rest of the conference. I retched, voluntarily, for a minute or two, and nothing more emerged, so I staggered back to bed. Ned Landers had gone further than any gender migrant, any anarchist, any voluntary autist. No man is an island, just watch me. And yet, apparently, it still hadn't been far enough. He'd still felt crowded, threatened, encroached upon. A biological kingdom wasn't enough. He'd aspired to more elbow room than even that unbridgeable genetic gulf could provide. Much better. And he'd almost attained it. That was what species self-knowledge had given him, a precise molecular definition of the H-word, which he could personally transcend before turning it against everyone who remained in its embrace. Vive la techno-liberation! Why not have 1,000,000 Ned Landers? Why not let every solipsistic lunatic and paranoid, self-appointed ethnic group savior on the planet wield the same power? Paradise for yourself and your clan, and apocalypse for everyone else. That was the fruit of perfect understanding. What's wrong? Don't you like the taste? I clutched at my stomach and slid my knees toward my chin. It changed the character of the nausea, if not exactly removing it. The room tipped, my limbs grew numb. I strived for absolute blankness. And if I'd dug deeper, done my job properly, I might have been the one to find him out, to stop him. Gina touched my cheek and kissed me tenderly. We were in Manchester, at the imaging lab. I was naked, she was clothed. She said, "Climb inside the scanner. You can do that for me, can't you?" I want us to be much, much closer, Andrew, so I need to see what's going on inside your brain." I started to comply, but then I hesitated, suddenly afraid of what she'd discover. She kissed me again. "No more arguments. If you love me, you'll shut up and do what you're told." She forced me down and closed the hatch of the machine. I saw my body from above. The scanner was more than a scanner. It raked me with ultraviolet lasers. I felt no pain, but the beams prized away layer after layer of living tissue with merciless precision. All the skin, all the flesh which concealed my secrets dissolved into a red mist around me, and then the mist began to part. I dreamed that I woke up screaming. At 7:30, I interviewed Henry Buzzo in one of the hotel meeting rooms. He was charming and articulate, a natural performer, but he didn't really want to talk about Violet Mosala. He wanted to recount anecdotes about famous dead people. "Of course, Steve Weinberg tried to prove that I was wrong about the Gravitino, but I soon straightened him out." CNET alone had devoted 3 full-length documentaries to Buzzo over the years, but it seemed that there were still more names he desperately needed to drop, on camera, before dying. I wasn't in a charitable mood. The 3 hours sleep I'd had after Lydia's call had been about as refreshing as a blow to the head. I went through the motions, feigning fascination and trying half-heartedly to steer the interview in a direction which might produce some material I could actually use. "What kind of place in history do you think the discoverer of the TOE will attain? Wouldn't that be the ultimate form of scientific immortality?" Buzo became self-deprecating.
There's no such thing as immortality for a scientist, not even for the greatest. Newton and Einstein are still famous today, but for how long? Shakespeare will probably outlast them both, and maybe even Hitler will, too.
I didn't have the heart to break the news to him that none of these were exactly household names anymore. I said, Newton's and Einstein's theories have been swallowed whole, though, absorbed into larger schemes. I know, you've already carved your name on one TOE, which turned out to be provisional, but all of the SUFT's architects said at the time that it was just a stepping stone. Don't you think the next TOE will be the real thing, the final theory which lasts forever? Buzo had given the question a lot more thought than I had. He said,
It might. It certainly might. I can imagine a universe in which we can probe no further, in which deeper explanations are literally, physically impossible, but...
Your own TOE describes such a universe, doesn't it?
Yes, but it could be right about everything else and wrong about that. The same is true of Mosala's and Nishide's.
I said sourly, So when will we know, one way or the other? When will we be sure that we've struck bottom?
Well, if I'm right, then you'll never be sure that I'm right. Well, if I'm right, then you'll never be sure that I'm right. My TOE doesn't allow itself to be proved final and complete, even if it is final and complete.
Buzo grinned, delighted at the prospect of such a perverse legacy.
The only kind of TOE which could leave any less room for doubt would be one which required its own finality, which made that fact absolutely central. Newton was swallowed up and digested, Einstein was swallowed up and digested, and the old SUFT will go the same way in a matter of days. They were all closed systems. They were all vulnerable. The only TOE which could be guaranteed immune to the process would be one which actively defends itself, which turned its gaze outward to describe not just the universe, but also every conceivable alternative theory which could somehow supersede it, and then rendered them all demonstrably false, in a single blow. He shook his head gleefully. But there's nothing like that on offer here. If you want absolute certainty, you've come to the wrong side of town.
The other side of town was still just outside the hotel's main entrance. The mystical Renaissance Carnival hadn't gone away. I headed out onto the street anyway. I urgently needed a dose of fresh air if I was going to be more than half conscious for the lecture on ATM software techniques which Mosala was due to attend at 9. The sky was dazzling, and the air was already warm. Stateless seemed unable to decide whether to surrender to a temperate autumn or hold out for an Indian summer. The sunshine lifted my spirits slightly, but I still felt crippled, beaten, overwhelmed. I weaved my way past the stalls and small tents, dodging goldfish bowl jugglers and hand-stilt walkers. Impressive acts, mostly. It was only the droning songs of the buskers which really made me feel that I was running a gauntlet. While members of Humble Science had been showing up at every press conference and doing their best to repeat the tone of Walsh's encounter with Mosala, MR had remained endearingly innocuous by comparison. I was beginning to suspect that it was a deliberate strategy, a good cult, bad cult game, to widen their combined appeal. Humble Science had nothing to lose by extremism. Those few members who left in disgust at Walsh's tactics, to join MR most likely, would be more than compensated for by an influx from groups like Celtic Wisdom and Saxon Light, Northern Europe's equivalents of PACDF, only more influential. I recalled a scene from one of the Muteba Kazadi biographies I'd skimmed. When asked in reproving tones by a BBC journalist why he'd declined an invitation to take part in a traditional Lunda fertility ceremony, he'd politely suggested that she go home and berate a few cabinet ministers for failing to celebrate the solstice at Stonehenge. 10 years later, there were half a dozen MPs who seemed to have taken the suggestion at face value. No cabinet ministers, though. So far. I paused to watch the MR theater troupe, ready to play Spot the Mutilated classic.
After a few baffling lines of garbled biotech speak, unplaceable but weirdly familiar, hairs stood up on the back of my neck. They'd seized on the news of Landers and his viruses, and were acting out their own hastily scripted version of the story. What's more, most of their descriptions of Landers' modified personal biochemistry came straight out of the narration to Junk DNA. CNET's news editors must have mined the discarded segment of the documentary for some instant technical background when they put together their final release. I shouldn't have been surprised by any of this, but the speed with which events thousands of kilometers away had been recycled as an instant parable was unsettling enough. Hearing my own words echoed back at me as part of the feedback loop verged on the surreal. An actor playing one of the FBI agents sent to gather Lander's computer files turned to the audience, all three of us, and proclaimed, "This knowledge could destroy us all. We must avert our gaze." His companion replied mournfully, "Yes, but this is only one man's folly. The same sacred mysteries are spelled out in 10 million other machines. Until every one of those files is erased, none of us will ever sleep safely." My head throbbed and my throat tightened. I couldn't deny that in the dead of night, confused and in pain, I'd shared this sentiment entirely. And now? I walked on. I had no time to waste on Landers or MR. Keeping up with Violet Mosala was already proving near enough to impossible. The whole documentary kept being transmuted into something new before my eyes, and however gloriously unworldly her arcane physics, Mosala was entangled in so many political complications that I was beginning to lose count. Had Sarah Knight known about Mosala's plans to emigrate to Stateless? If she had, it would have made the project 1,000 times more attractive to her than any deal with the Anthrocosmologists. Would she have kept a selling point like that from CNET, though? Maybe, if she'd wanted to take it to another network. But in that case, why wasn't she here, shouldering me aside, making Violet Mosala techno-liberateur? Or maybe Mosala had sworn her to secrecy, and she'd honored that promise, even though it had meant losing the job. It was driving me insane. Even in her absence, Sarah seemed to be one step ahead of me all the way. At the very least, I should have asked her to collaborate. It would have been worth splitting my fee with her and giving her a co-director's credit just to find out what she knew. A bright red graphic flashed up over my visual field, a small circle at the center of a larger one with crosshairs. I froze, confused. As I shifted my gaze, the target clung to a face in the crowd. It was a person in a clown suit, handing out MR literature. Akili Kuale? Witness thought it was. The clown wore a mask of active makeup, currently a checkerboard of green and white. From this distance, V might have been any gender, including asex. V was about the right build and height, and V's features weren't dissimilar, so far as I could tell, with squares painted all over them. It wasn't impossible, but I wasn't convinced. I approached. The clown called out, Get your daily archetype. Get the truth about the dangers of Frankensteins." The accent, even if I couldn't place it geographically, was unmistakable, and this hawker's cry sounded every bit as ironic as Kuale's observations about Janet Walsh. I walked up to the clown. V regarded me impassively. I said, "How much?" "The truth costs nothing, but $1 would help the cause." "Which cause is that? MR or AC?" V said quietly, "We all have our roles to play. I'm pretending to be MR, you're pretending to be a journalist." That stung. I said, "Fair enough. I'll admit I don't know half as much as Sarah Knight, but I'm getting there, and I'd get there faster with your help." Kuale regarded me with undisguised mistrust. The checkerboard on V's face suddenly melted into blue and red diamonds, a disorienting sight, though V's fixed stare through the transition only made V's contempt shine through all the more clearly. V said, "Why don't you just take a pamphlet and fuck off?" V held one out to me. Read it and eat it. I've swallowed enough bad news today. And the keystone, V grinned sardonically. Ah, Amanda Conroy summons you to a hearthside, and you think you know it all. If I thought I knew it all, why would I be pleading with you to tell me what I've missed? V hesitated. I said, On Sunday night, you asked me to keep my eyes open. Tell me why, and tell me what I'm looking for. And I'll do it. Oh, line break got me. Tell me why, and tell me what I'm looking for, and I'll do it. I don't want to see Mosala hurt any more than you do, but I need to know exactly what's going on. Kuale thought it over, still suspicious, but clearly tempted. Short of Mosala's colleagues, or Karine de Groot, all highly unlikely to cooperate, I was probably the closest V could ever hope to get to Viz idol. V mused. If you were working for the other side, why would you pretend to be so incompetent? I took the insult in my stride. I'm not even sure that I know who the other side is. Kuale caved in. Meet me outside this building in half an hour. V took my hand and wrote an address on my palm. It wasn't the house where I'd met Conroy. In half an hour, I was supposed to be filming Mosala at yet another lecture. But the documentary would survive with a few less reaction shots to choose from, and Mosala would probably be relieved to be left in peace for a change. Kuale thrust a rolled-up pamphlet into my open hand before I turned away. I almost discarded it, but then I changed my mind. Ned Landers was on the cover, bolts protruding from the side of his neck, while an Escher rip-off effect had him reaching out of the portrait and painting it himself. The headline read, The Myth of a Self-Made Man, which was, at least, wittier than anything the Murdochs could come up with. When I flicked through the article within, though, there was no talk of monitoring or restricting access to human genome data, no discussion of U.S. and Chinese resistance to international inspections of sites with DNA synthesis equipment, no practical suggestions whatsoever for preventing another Chapel Hill. Beyond a call for all human DNA maps to be, quote, erased and undiscovered, unquote, about as useful as imploring the people of the world to forget the true shape of the planet. Well, never say fucking never, dude. There was nothing but cult speak, the danger of meddling with quintessential mysteries, the human need for an ineffable secret to life, the techno-rape of the collective soul. If mystical Renaissance really wanted to speak for all of humanity, define the fit and proper boundaries of knowledge, and dictate, or censor, the deepest truths of the universe, they were going to have to do better than this. I closed my eyes and laughed with relief and gratitude. Now that it had passed, I could admit it. For a while, I'd almost believed that they might have claimed me. I'd almost imagined that I might have ended up crawling into their recruitment tent on my hands and knees, head bowed with appropriate humility, at last, proclaiming, I was blind, but now I see. I was psychically numbed, but now I'm attuned. I was all yang and no yin, left-brained, linear, and hierarchical, but now I'm ready to embrace the alchemical balance between the rational and the mystical. Only say the word, and I will be healed. The address Kuale had given me was a baker's shop. Imported luxuries aside, all the food on Stateless came from the sea, but the proteins and starches in the nodules of the engineered seaweeds which flourished at the borders of the reefs were all but identical to those in any grain of wheat, and so was the smell they produced on baking. The familiar aroma made me light-headed with hunger, but the thought of swallowing a single mouthful of fresh bread was enough to make me nauseous. I should have known, by then, that there was something physically wrong with me, beyond the after-effects of the flight, beyond the broken melatonin sleep, beyond my sadness over losing Gina, beyond the stress of finding myself in at the deep end of a story which showed no sign of bottoming out. But I didn't have my farm to pronounce the illness real, I didn't trust the local doctors, I didn't have time to be sick. So I told myself that it was all in my head, and the only possible cure was to try to ignore it. Kuale appeared, sans clown suit, just in time to save me from either passing out or throwing up. V walked past without even glancing at me, radiating nervous energy. I followed, and started recording, resisting the urge to shout out V's name and deflate the implied cloak and dagger solemnity. I caught up and walked alongside Ver. What does mainstream AC mean, anyway? Kuale glanced at me sideways, edgy and irritated, but V deigned to answer. We don't know who the Keystone is. We accept that we may never know for certain, but we respect all the people who seem to be likely candidates. That all sounded obscenely moderate and reasonable. Respect or revere? V rolled V's eyes. The Keystone is just another person, the first to grasp the TOE completely, but there's no reason why a billion others can't do the same after her. Someone has to be first. It's as simple as that. The Keystone is not, remotely, a god. The Keystone need not even know that V's created the universe. All V has to do is explain it. While people like you stand back and explain the act of creation? Kuale made a dismissive gesture, as if V had no time to waste on metaphysical nitpicking. I said, So why are you so concerned about Violet Mosala if she's nothing so cosmically special after all? V was bemused. Does a person have to be some kind of supernatural being not to deserve not to be killed? Do I have to get down on my knees and worship the woman as mother goddess of the universe in order to care whether she lives or dies? Call her mother goddess of the universe to her face, and you'd soon wish you were dead yourself. Kuale grinned. And rightly so. V added stoically, but I know she thinks AC is even lower than the ignorance cults. The very fact that we desist from God talk only makes us more insidious in her eyes. She thinks we're parasites feeding off science, following the work of TOE theorists, stealing it, abusing it, and not even having the honesty to speak the language of the anti-rationalists. V shrugged lightly. She despises us. I still respect her, though. And whether she's Keystone or not, she's one of the greatest physicists of her generation. She's a powerful force for techno-liberation. Why should I need to deify her to value her life? Okay. This whole laid-back attitude seemed far too good to be true, but it wasn't inconsistent with anything I'd heard from Conroy. That's mainstream AC. Now tell me about the heretics. Kuale groaned. The permutations are endless. Imagine any variation you like, and there's sure to be someone on the planet who embraces it as the truth. We don't have a patent on anthrocosmology. There are 10 billion people out there, and they are all capable of believing anything they want to, however close to us in metaphysics, however far away in spirit. This was pure evasion, but I didn't get a chance to press the point. Kuale saw a tram ahead, beginning to move away from its stop, and V started running for it. I struggled to keep up. We both made it, but I took a while to get my breath back. We were headed west, out toward the coast. The tram was only half full, but Kuale remained standing in the doorway, gripping a handrail and leaning out into the wind. V said, If I show you the people you need to recognize, will you let me know if you see them? I'll give you a contact number and an encryption algorithm, and all you have to do is... I said, Slow down. Who are these people? They're a danger to Violet Mosala. You mean, you suspect they're a danger? I know it. Okay, so who are they? What difference would I make if I told you their names? It wouldn't mean anything to you. No, but you can tell me who they're working for. Which government, which biotech company? V's face hardened. I told Sarah Knight too much. I'm not repeating that mistake. Too much for what? Did she betray you? To... CNET? No. Kuale scowled. I was missing the point. Sarah told me what happened with CNET. You pulled a few strings, and all the work she'd done counted for nothing. She was angry, but she wasn't surprised. She said that's what the networks were like. And she bore you no real grudge. She said she was ready to pass on everything she knew if you agreed to refund her costs out of your research budget and maintain confidentiality. I said, What are you talking about? I gave her the okay to tell you everything she knew about AC. Why do you think I made such a fool of myself at the airport? If I'd known you were still in the dock, do you think I would have approached you like that? No. That much at least made sense. But why would she tell you she was going to brief me and then change her mind? I haven't heard a word from her. She doesn't answer my calls. Kuale fixed his eyes on me, sad and ashamed, but suddenly, painfully honest. And she doesn't answer mine. We left the tram at a stop on the outskirts of a small industrial complex, then walked southeast. If we were under professional surveillance, all of this incessant motion would change nothing. But if Kuale believed it made it safe for us to talk more freely, I was willing to tag along. I didn't accept for a moment that anything had happened to Sarah. She had every reason to wish both of us out of her life, a wish which a few words to her communications software could have granted. She might have had a brief, magnanimous fantasy about putting me in the picture, in spite of what I'd done to her, out of sheer journalistic solidarity, all of us pulling together for the sake of Mosala's history-making story which must be told, rah-rah, but then felt differently in the morning, once the chemical solace had worn off. What's more, I was beginning to have second thoughts about the threat to Mosala herself. I turned to Kuale. If biotech interests ever did assassinate Violet Mosala, she'd be an instant martyr for techno-liberation, and as a corpse she'd be just as good a mascot, just as good an excuse for the South African government to lead an anti-boycott revolt in the UN. Maybe, V conceded, if the headlines told the right story. How could the story fail to get out? Mosala's backers would hardly stay silent. Kuale smiled grimly. Do you know who owns most of the media? Yes, I do, so don't give me that paranoid bullshit. 100 different groups, 1,000 different people, 100 different groups, most of which also own large biotech concerns. 1,000 different people, most of them on the boards of at least one major player, from Agrogenesis to Vivotech. That's true, but there are other interests with other agendas. It's not as simple as you make it sound. We were alone now, on a large stretch of flat but unpaved reef rock, prepared but not yet built upon. Some small-scale construction machinery was clustered in the distance, but it appeared to be idle. Monroe had told me that no one could own land on Stateless, any more than they could own air, but equally there was nothing to stop people fencing off and monopolizing vast tracts of it. That they chose not to made me distinctly uneasy. It seemed like an unnatural exercise of restraint, a deliberately balanced consensus poised ready to collapse into a spate of land grabs, the creation of de facto titles, and an outraged, probably violent, backlash from those who hadn't got in first. And yet, why come all the way out here just to play Lord of the Flies? No society chooses to destroy itself, and if an ignorant tourist was capable of imagining how disastrous the land rush would be, the residents of Stateless must have thought it. Oh my gosh. Let's try this again. And if an ignorant tourist was capable of imagining how disastrous a land rush would be, the residents of Stateless must have thought it through themselves in 1,000 times more detail. I spread my arms to encompass the whole renegade island. If you really think the biotech companies can get away with murder, tell me why they haven't turned Stateless into a fireball. Bomb in El Nido made that solution unrepeatable. You need a government to do it for you, and no government now would risk the backlash. Sabotaged it, then? If Ingenuity can't come up with something to dissolve their own creation back into the sea, then the Beach Boys were lying. The Beach Boys? Californian biotechnologists are the best in the world. Wasn't that one of theirs? Kuale said, Ingenuity are selling versions of Stateless all over the Pacific. Why would they sabotage their best demonstration model, their best advertisement, unauthorized or not? They might not have planned it this way, but the truth is, Stateless has cost them nothing, so long as no one else goes renegade. I wasn't convinced, but the argument was going nowhere. Do you want to show me your gallery of alleged corporate assassins, and then explain to me, very carefully, exactly what you plan to do if I tell you that I've cited one of these people? Because if you think I'm entering into a conspiracy of murder, even in defense of the Keystone herself, even on Stateless, Kuale cut me off. There's no question of violence. All we want to do is watch these people, gather the necessary intelligence, and tip off conference security as soon as we have something tangible. Viz's notepad beeped. V halted, took it out of Viz's pocket, and gazed at the screen for several seconds, then carefully paced a dozen meters south. I said, "Do you mind if I ask what you're doing?" Kuale beamed proudly. "My data security is linked to the global positioning system. The most crucial files can't be opened, even with the right passwords and voice print, unless you're standing on the right spot, which changes hour by hour. And I'm the only one who knows exactly how it changes." I almost asked, why not memorize a long list of passwords instead of locations? Stupid question. The GPS was there, so it had to be used, and a more convoluted security scheme was better, not because it was any more secure, but because the complexity of the system was an end in itself. Technophilia was like any other aesthetic. There was no point asking why. Kuale was only half a generation younger than me, and we probably shared 80% of our worldviews, but V'd pushed all the things we both believed much further. Science and technology seemed to have given her everything V could ask for: an escape from the poisoned battleground of gender, a political movement worth fighting for, and even a quasi-religion. Insane enough in its own way, but unlike most other science-friendly faiths, at least it wasn't a laboriously contrived synthesis of modern physics and some dog-eared historical relic, a mock truce like the fatuities of quantum Buddhism or the Church of the Revised Standard Judeo-Christian Big Bang, which is all one title. I watched Ver tinkering with the software, waiting for some conjunction of satellites and atomic clocks, and wondered, would I have been happier if I'd made the same decisions? As an asex, saved from a dozen screwed-up relationships. As a techno-liberateur, with ideological zeal to shield me from any doubts about Nagasaki or Ned Landers. As an anthrocosmologist, with a final explanation for everything which put me one up on with a final explanation for everything which put me one up on even the TOE theorists, and inoculated me against competing religions in my old age. Would I have been happier? Maybe. But then, happiness was overrated. Kuale's software chimed success. I walked over and accepted the data V'd unlocked. Tight beam infrared flowing between our notepads. I said, "I don't suppose you want to tell me how you know about these people, or how I'm meant to verify what you say about them?" "That's what Sarah Knight asked me." "I'm not surprised. And now I'm asking." Kuale ignored me. The subject was closed. V gestured at my abdomen with Viz's notepad and instructed me solemnly, "Move everything in there first chance you get. Perfect security. You're lucky." Sure. While one ingenuity assassin is running around stateless with your notepad trying to find the right geographical coordinates, the others will be saving time by carving me open. Kuale laughed. "That's the spirit. You may not be much of a journalist, but we'll make a revolutionary martyr out of you yet." V pointed across the expanse of reef rock, glistening green and silver in the morning sun. "We should return to the city by separate routes. If you head that way, you'll hit the southwest tram line in 20 minutes. Okay. I didn't have the energy to argue. As V turned to leave, though, I said, "Before you vanish, will you answer one last question?" V shrugged. "No harm in asking." "Why are you doing this? I still don't understand. You say you really don't care whether Violet Mosala is the Keystone or not. But even if she's such a great human being that her death would be a global tragedy, what makes that your personal responsibility? She knows exactly what she's buying into, moving to Stateless. She's a grown woman with resources of her own and more political clout than you or I could ever hope for. She's not helpless, she's not stupid, and if she knew what you were doing, she'd probably strangle you with her bare hands. So, why can't you leave her to take care of herself?" Kuale hesitated. and cast V's eyes down. I seemed to have hit a nerve at last. V had the air of someone searching for the right words with which to unburden herself. The silence stretched on, but I waited patiently. Sarah Knight had extracted the whole story, hadn't she? There was no reason why I couldn't do the same. Kuale looked up and replied casually, "Like I said, no harm in asking." V turned and walked away. Chapter 18. I viewed the data Kuale had given me while I waited for the tram. 18 faces, but no names. The images were standardized 3D portraits, backgrounds removed, lightning homogenized, like police mugshots. There were 12 men and 6 women, of diverse ages and ethnicities. It seemed a curiously large number. Kuale hadn't suggested that every one of them was actually on stateless, but how, exactly, could V have gotten hold of portraits of the 18 corporate assassins most likely to be sent to the island? What kind of source, what kind of leak, what kind of data theft could have yielded precisely this much and no more? In any case, I had no intention of letting the ACs know if I spotted one of these faces in a crowd, less out of fear that I might be putting myself at risk by siding with radical techno-liberateurs against powerful vested interests, than out of a lingering suspicion that Kuale might yet prove to be entirely off the planet, as paranoid a Mosala fan as I'd first imagined, and more. Without any way of confirming Viz's story, I could hardly unleash an unknown retribution on some total stranger who happened to stray too close to Violet Mosala. For all I knew, this was a gallery of innocent ignorance cultists, snapped as they disembarked from a charter flight. The fact that Mosala had no shortage of potential enemies didn't prove that Kuale knew who they were, or that V'd told me the truth about everything. About anything. Sorry. Even the version of Anthrocosmology I'd been fed sounded far too reasonable and dispassionate to be true. The Keystone is just another person, honestly. All our concern for Violet Mosala is due to her numerous other good points. Why go to the trouble of inventing a cult which elevates someone to the status of prime cause for everything, and then treat that fact as all but insignificant? Kuale had protested too much. By the time I reached the hotel, the ATM software lecture was almost over, so I sat in the lobby to wait for Mosala to emerge. The more I thought about it, the less I was prepared to trust anything Kuale and Conroy had told me. But I knew it could take months to find out what the Anthrocosmologists were really about. Other than Indrani Lee, there was only one person who was likely to hold the answers, and I was sick of remaining ignorant out of sheer dumb pride. I called Sarah. If she was in Australia, it was broad daylight on the East Coast by now, but the same answering system responded as before. I left another message for her. I couldn't bring myself to come right out and say it in plain English. I abused my position with CNET. I stole the project from you, and I didn't deserve it. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Instead, I offered her participation in Violet Mosala in whatever role now suited her, on whatever terms we could agree were mutually fair. I signed off, expecting to feel at least some small measure of relief from this belated attempt to make amends. Instead, a powerful sense of unease descended on me. I looked around the brightly lit lobby, staring at the dazzling patches of sunshine on the ornately patterned gold and white floor, stateless Spartan as ever, as if hoping that the light itself might flood in through my eyes and clear the fog of panic from my brain. It didn't. I sat with my head in my hands, unable to make sense of the dread I felt. Things weren't that desperate. I was still in the dark about far too much, but less so than 4 days ago. I was making progress, wasn't I? I was staying afloat. Barely. The space around me seemed to expand. The lobby, the sunlit floor, retreated, an infinitesimal shift, but it was impossible to ignore. I glanced down at my notepad clock, light-headed with fear. Mosala's lecture was due to end in 3 minutes, but the time seemed to stretch out ahead of me, an uncrossable void. I had to make contact with someone or something. Before I could change my mind, I had Hermes call Caliban, a front end for a hacking consortium. An androgynous grinning face appeared, mutated and flowing, changing its features second by second as it spoke. Only the whites of its eyes stayed constant, as if peering out from behind an infinitely malleable mask.
Bad weather coming down, petitioner. There's ice on the signal wires.
Snow began to swirl around the faces. Their skin tones favored grays and blues.
Nothing's clear. Nothing's easy.
Spare me the hype. I transmitted Sarah Knight's communications number. What can you tell me about that for $100? Caliban leered.
The Styx is frozen solid.
Frost formed on its various lips and eyelashes. 150. Caliban seemed unimpressed, but Hermes flashed up a window showing a credit transfer request. I okayed it, reluctantly. A screen full of green text, mockingly out of focus, appeared to illuminate the software faces.
The number belongs to Sarah Allison Knight, Australian citizen, primary residence 17E Parade Avenue, Lindfield, Sydney. NFEM, date of birth 4th April 2028.
I know all that, you useless shit. Where is she now? Precisely. And when did she last accept a call in person? The green text faded, and Caliban shivered.
Wolves are howling on the steppes. Underground rivers are turning to glaciers.
I restrained myself from wasting more invective. I'll give you 50.
Veins of solid ice beneath the rock. Nothing moves, nothing changes.
I gritted my teeth. 100. My research budget was vanishing fast, and this had nothing to do with Violet Mosala, but I had to know. Orange symbols danced across gray flesh. Caliban announced,
Our Sarah last accepted a call in person on this number in the central metropolitan footprint of Kyoto, Japan, at 10:23 and 14 seconds Universal Time on 26th March, 2055.
And where is she now?
No device is connected to the net under this ID since the stated call.
Meaning she hadn't used her notepad to contact anyone or access any service. She hadn't so much as viewed a news bulletin or downloaded a 3-minute music video. Unless... $50, take it or leave it, for her new communications number. Caliban took it and smiled.
Bad guess. She has no new number, no new account.
I said numbly, That's all. Thank you. Caliban mimed astonishment at this unwarranted courtesy and blew me a parting kiss.
Call again. And remember, petitioner, data wants to be free.
Why Kyoto? The only connection I could think of was Yasuko Nishide. Meaning what? She'd still planned to cover the Einstein conference after all, but with a rival profile of a rival theorist? And the only reason she wasn't yet on stateless was Nishide's illness? Why the communications blackout, though? Kuale's grim, unspoken conclusion made no sense. Why would biotech interests want to harm Sarah Knight if she'd shown every sign of abandoning Violet Mosala for another, thoroughly apolitical physicist? People began to cross the lobby, talking excitedly. I looked up. The auditorium down the corridor was emptying. Mosala and Helen Wu emerged together. I met up with them. Mosala was beaming. Andrew, you missed all the fun. Serge Bischoff just released a new algorithm which is going to save me days of computer time. Wu frowned and corrected her.
Save all of us days, please.
Of course. Mosala stage whispered to me, "Helen still doesn't realize that she's on my side, whether she likes it or not." She added, "I have a summary of the lecture, if you want to see it." I said tonelessly, "No." I realized how blunt that sounded, but I felt so spaced out, so disconnected, that I really didn't care. Mosala gave me a curious look, more concerned than angry. Wu left us. I asked Mosala, "Have you heard any more about Nishide?" "Ah," she became serious. "It seems he's not going to make it to the conference after all. His secretary contacted the organizers. He's had to be hospitalized. It's pneumonia again." She added sadly, "If this keeps up, I don't know. He may retire altogether." I closed my eyes. The floor began to tilt. A distant voice asked, "Are you all right? Andrew?" I pictured my face glowing white-hot. I opened my eyes, and I thought I finally understood what was happening. I said, "Can I talk to you? Please?" "Of course." Sweat began running down my cheeks. "Don't lose your temper. Just hear me out." Mosala leaned forward, frowning. She hesitated, then put a hand on my forehead. "You're burning up. You need to see a doctor right straight away." I screamed at her hoarsely, "Just listen! Listen to me!" People around us were staring. Mosala opened her mouth, outraged, ready to put me in my place, but then she changed her mind. "Go ahead. I'm listening." "You need blood tests, a full micropathology report. Everything. You're asymptomatic now, but however you feel, do it. There's no way of knowing what the incubation period might be." I was dripping sweat and swaying on my feet. Every breath felt like a lungful of fire. "What did you think they were going to do? Send in a hit squad with machine guns? I doubt I was meant to get sick at all, but the thing must have mutated on the way, keyed to your genome, but the lock fell off en route." I laughed. "In my blood. In my brain." I sagged and dropped to my knees. A convulsion passed through my whole body, like a peristaltic spasm trying to squeeze the flesh right out of my skin. People around me were shouting, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I struggled to lift my head, but when I succeeded, briefly, black and purple bruises flowered across my vision. I stopped fighting it. I closed my eyes and lay down on the cool, welcoming tiles. In the hospital ward, for a long time, I paid no attention to my surroundings. I thrashed about in a knot of sweat-soaked sheets and let the world remain mercifully out of focus. I sought no information from the people around me. In my delirium, I believed I had all the answers. Ned Landers was behind everything. When we met, he'd infected me with one of his secret viruses. And now, because I'd traveled so far to escape it, although Helen Wu had proved that the whole world was nothing but a loop and everything led back to the same point, now I was coming down with Lander's secret weapon against Violet Mosala, Andrew Worth, and all his other enemies. I was coming down with distress. A tall Fijian man dressed in white poked a drip into my elbow. I tried to shake it out. He held me still. I muttered triumphantly, "Don't you know there's no point? There's no cure." Distress was nowhere near as bad as I'd imagined. I wasn't screaming like the woman in Miami, was I? I was nauseous and feverish, but I felt sure that I was headed for some form of beautiful, painless oblivion. I smiled up at the man. "I'm gone forever now. I've gone away." He said, "I don't think so. I think you've been there, and you're coming back." I shook my head defiantly, but then cried out in surprise and pain. My bowels had gone into spasm, and I was emptying them, uncontrollably, into a pan I hadn't even noticed beneath me. I tried to stop. I couldn't. But it wasn't the incontinence that horrified me as much as the consistency. This wasn't diarrhea. It was water. The motion stopped eventually, but I kept shuddering. I pleaded for an explanation. "What's happening to me?" You have cholera. Drug-resistant cholera. We can control the fever and keep you hydrated, but the disease is going to have to run its course. So you're in for the long haul. Chapter 19. As the first wave of delirium subsided, I tried to assess my position dispassionately, to arm myself with the facts. I was not an infant, I was not old, I was not suffering from malnutrition, parasite infestation, an impaired immune system, or any other complicating factor. I was in the care of qualified people. My condition was being monitored constantly by sophisticated machines. I told myself that I was not going to die. Fever and nausea, absent in classical cholera, meant that I had the Mexico City biotype, first seen in the aftermath of the Quake of 15, long since distributed globally. It entered the bloodstream as well as the gut, producing a wider range of symptoms, a greater risk to health. Nevertheless, millions of people survived it every year, often in much worse circumstances. Without antipyretics to control the fever, without intravenous electrolytes, without any antibiotics at all, making drug resistance academic. In the largest metropolitan hospitals, in Santiago or Bombay, the particular strain of Vibrio cholerae could be sequenced completely, and a de novo drug designed and synthesized in a matter of hours. Most people who contracted the disease, though, had no prospect whatsoever of receiving this luxurious miracle cure. They simply lived through the rise and fall of the bacterial empire inside them. They rode it out. I could do the same. There was one small flaw in this clear-eyed, optimistic scenario. Most people had no reason to suspect that their guts were full of a genetic weapon which had detonated one step short of its target. Engineered to mimic a natural strain of cholera as closely as possible, but engineered to push the envelope of plausible symptoms far enough to kill a healthy, 27-year-old woman receiving the best care that Stateless could provide. The ward was clean, bright, spacious, quiet. I spent most of my time screened off from the other patients, but the white translucent partitions let the daylight through, and even when my skin was on fire, the faint touch of radiant warmth reaching my body was strangely comforting, like a familiar embrace. By late afternoon on the first day, the antipyretics seemed to be working. I watched the graph on the bedside monitor. My temperature was still pathological, but the immediate risk of brain damage had passed. I tried to swallow liquids, but nothing stayed down, so I moistened my parched lips and throat and let the intravenous drip do the rest. Nothing could stop the cramps and the bowel spasms. When they came, it was like demonic possession, like being ridden by a voodoo god, an obscene bear hug by something powerful and alien constricting inside my flesh. I couldn't believe that any muscle in my own rag-doll body could still be so strong. I tried to stay calm, to accept each brutal convulsion as inevitable, to keep my mind fixed on the sure and certain knowledge that this, too, would pass. But every time, the surge of nausea swept away my laboriously composed stoicism like a house of matchsticks beneath a tidal wave, and left me shuddering and sobbing, convinced that I was finally dying, and half believing that that was what I wanted more than anything else. Instant release. My melatonin patch had been removed. The abyssal sleep it generated was too dangerous now. But I couldn't begin to tell the difference between the erratic rhythms of melatonin withdrawal and my otherwise natural state. Long stretches of half-sensate paralytic stupor, broken up by brief, violent dreams, and moments of panic-stricken clarity each time I believed my intestines were about to rupture and wash out of me in a red and gray tide. I told myself that I was stronger and more patient than the disease. Generations of bacteria could come and go. All I had to do was hang on. All I had to do was outlive them. On the morning of the second day, Mosala and de Groot came to visit. They seemed like time travelers to me. My previous life on Stateless had already receded into the distant past. Mosala seemed shocked by my appearance. She said gently, "I've taken your advice. I've been examined thoroughly. I'm not infected, Andrew. I've spoken to your doctor, and he thinks you must have caught this from the food on the plane." I croaked, "As anyone else? On the same flight?" "No, but one sealed package might have missed being irradiated and ended up imperfectly sterilized. It can happen." I didn't have the strength to argue, and this theory made a certain amount of sense. A random glitch had breached the technological barrier between Third World and First, momentarily scrambling the impeccable free market logic of employing the cheapest caterers on the planet and then blasting away the risks with an equally cheap burst of gamma rays. That evening, my temperature began rising again. Michael, the Fijian man who'd greeted me when I first woke, and who'd since explained that he was both doctor and nurse, if you insist on using those archaic foreign words here, sat by my bed for most of the night. Or at least, he was there in the flesh during every brief window of lucidity I experienced. The rest of the time, for all I knew, I hallucinated his presence. I slept 3 straight hours from dawn to mid-morning, long enough for my first coherent dream. Clawing my way up toward consciousness, I clung defiantly to the happy ending. The disease had run its course. It had burned itself out. My symptoms had vanished. Gina had even flown in overnight to take me back, to take me home. I'd been woken by an intense cramp. I was soon expelling gray water full of intestinal mucus, gasping obscenities, wanting to die. In the late afternoon, with the sunlit ward behind the screens as vague and luminous as heaven, reenacting the same convulsions for the 1,000th time, shitting out, yet again, every last drop of fluid the drip had fed into me, I found myself emitting a keening noise, baring my teeth and shivering, like a dog, like a sick hyena. Early on the 4th day, my fever almost vanished. Everything which had come before seemed like an anesthetized nightmare, violent and frightening but inconsequential. A dream sequence shot through gauze. A merciless gray solidity clung to everything in sight. The screens around me were caked with dust. The sheets were stained yellow from dried sweat. My skin was coated with slime. My lips, my tongue, my throat were cracked and stinging, sloughing dead cells and seeping a thin discharge which tasted more like salt than blood. Every muscle from my diaphragm to my groin felt injured, useless, tortured beyond repair, but tensed like an animal flinching from a rain of blows, ready for more. The joints of my knees felt as if I'd been crouching for a week on cold, hard ground. The cramps, the spasms, began again. I'd never been so lucid. They'd never been worse. I had no patience left. All I wanted to do was rise to my feet and walk out of the hospital, leaving my body behind. Flesh and bacteria could fight it out between themselves. I'd lost interest. I tried. I closed my eyes and pictured it. I willed it to happen. I wasn't delirious, but walking away from this pointless, ugly confrontation seemed like such a sensible choice, such an obvious solution, that for a moment I suspended all disbelief. And I finally understood, as I never had before, not through sex, not through food, not through the lost exuberant physicality of childhood, not from the pinpricks of 100 petty injuries and instantly cured diseases, that this vision of escape was meaningless, a false arithmetic, an idiot dream. This diseased body was my whole self. It was not a temporary shelter for some tiny, indestructible man-god living in the safe, warm dark behind my eyes. From skull to putrid arsehole, this was the instrument of everything I'd ever do, ever feel, ever be. I'd never believed otherwise, but I'd never really felt it, never really known it. I'd never before been forced to embrace the whole sordid, twitching, visceral truth. Was this what Daniel Cavallini had learned when he tore away his blindfold? I stared up at the ceiling, tense and shivering, claustrophobic, all the nausea and pain spread across my abdomen, hardening into rigid bands like metal embedded in the flesh. By noon, my temperature started climbing again. I was glad. I wanted delirium. I wanted confusion. Sometimes the fever flayed every nerve, magnified and sharpened every sensation, but I still hoped it might erase this new understanding, which was worse than the pain. It didn't. Mosala visited again. I smiled and nodded, but said nothing, and I couldn't concentrate on her words. The two screens on either side of the bed had remained in place, but the third had been moved aside, and when I raised my head I could see the patient opposite me, a forlorn, skinny boy with a drip, his parents beside him. His father was reading to him quietly. His mother held his hand. The whole tableau seemed impossibly distant, separated from me by an unbridgeable gulf. I couldn't imagine ever again having the power to climb to my feet and walk 5 meters. Mosala left. I drifted. Then I noticed someone standing near the foot of the bed, and an electric jolt ran through my body. A shock of transcendental awe. Striding through unforgiving reality, an angel. Janet Walsh turned, half toward me. I raised myself up on my elbows and called out to her, terrified, enraptured. I think I understand now why you do it. Not how, but why. She looked straight at me, mildly puzzled, but unperturbed. I said, "Please talk to me. I'm ready to listen." Walsh frowned slightly, tolerant but uncomprehending, her wings fluttering patiently. "I know I've offended you. I'm sorry. Can't you forgive me? I want to hear everything now. I want to understand how you make it work." She regarded me in silence. I said, "How do you lie about the world? And how do you make yourself believe it? How can you see the whole truth, know the whole truth, and go on pretending that none of it matters? What's the secret? What's the trick? What's the magic?" My face was already burning white-hot, but I leaned forward, hoping that her sheer radiance might infect me with her great transforming insight. "I'm trying. You have to believe I'm trying." I looked away, suddenly at a loss for words, struck dumb by the ineffable mystery of her presence. Then a cramp seized me. The thing I could no longer pretend was a demon snake constricted inside me. I said, "But when the truth, the underworld, the TOE, reaches up, takes you in its fist, and squeezes..." I raised my own hand, meaning to demonstrate, but it was already clenched tight involuntarily. "How do you ignore it? How do you deny it? How do you go on fooling yourself that you've ever stood above it, ever pulled the strings, ever run the show?" Sweat was running into my eyes, blinding me. I brushed it away with my clenched fist, laughing. "When every cell, every fucking atom in your body burns the message into your skin, everything you value, everything you cherish, everything you live for is just the scum on the surface of a vacuum 35 powers of 10 deep. How do you go on lying? How do you close your eyes to that?" I waited for her answer. Solace, redemption were within my grasp. I held my arms out toward her in supplication. Walsh smiled faintly, then walked on without saying a word. I woke in the early hours of the morning, burning up again, drenched in sweat. Michael was sitting on the chair beside me, reading from his notepad. The whole ward was lit softly from above, but the light of the words shone up more brightly. I whispered, "Today, I tried to become everything I despise, but I couldn't even manage that." He put the notepad down and waited for me to continue. "I'm lost. I really am lost." Michael glanced at the bedside monitor and shook his head. "You're going to live through this. In a week, you won't even be able to imagine how you feel right now." "I'm not talking about the cholera. I'm having—" I laughed. It hurt. "I'm having what the mystical Renaissance would call a spiritual crisis. And I have nowhere to turn for comfort. Nowhere to turn to for strength. No lover, no family, no nation, no religion, no ideology. Nothing." Michael said calmly, "Then you're lucky. I envy you." I gaped at him, appalled by this heartlessness. He said, "Nowhere to bury your head, like an ostrich on reef rock. I envy you. You might learn something." I had no reply to that. I started shivering. I was sweating and aching, but icy cold. "I take back what I said about the cholera. It's 50-50. I'm being equally fucked by both." Michael put his hands behind his neck and stretched, then rearranged himself on the chair. "You're a journalist. Do you want to hear a story?" "Don't you have some vital medical work to do?" "I'm doing it." Waves of nausea began sweeping up from my bowels. "Okay, I'll listen, if you'll let me record. What's this story about?" He grinned. "My own spiritual crisis, of course." I should have guessed. I closed my eyes and invoked witness. The whole action was instinctive, and it was over in half a second. But when it was done, I was shocked. I felt like I was on the verge of disintegrating, but this machinery, as much a part of me as anything organic, still worked perfectly. He began, "When I was a child, my parents used to take me to the most beautiful church in the world." "I've heard that line before." "This time it's true. The Reformed Methodist Church in Suva. It was a huge white building. It looked plain from the outside, austere as a barn. But it had a row of stained-glass windows showing scenes from the scriptures, carved by a computer in sky blue, rose, and gold. Every wall was lined with 100 kinds of flowers, hibiscus, orchids, lilies, piled up to the roof. And the pews were always crammed with people. Everyone wore their finest, brightest clothes. Everyone sang, everyone smiled. It was like stepping straight into heaven. Even the sermons were beautiful. No hellfire, only comfort and joy. No ranting about sin and damnation, just some modest suggestions about kindness, charity, love." I said, "Sounds perfect. What happened? Did God send a greenhouse storm to put an end to all this blasphemous happiness and moderation?" "Oh, nothing happened to the church. It's still there." "But you parted company? Why?" "I took the scriptures too literally. They said put childish things away. So I did." "Now you're being facetious." He hesitated. "If you really want to know the precise escape route, it all started with just one parable. Have you ever heard the story of the widow's mite?" "Yes." "For years, as a schoolboy, I turned it over and over in my head. The poor widow's small gift was more precious than the rich man's large one. Okay, fine. I understood the message. I could see the dignity it gave to every act of charity. But I could see a whole lot more encoded in that parable, and those other things wouldn't go away. I could see a religion which cared more about feeling good than doing good. A religion which valued the pleasure of giving, or the pain, more than any tangible effect. A religion which put saving your own soul through good works far above their worldly consequences. Maybe I was reading too much into one story, but if it hadn't started there, it would have started somewhere else. My religion was beautiful, but I needed more than that. I demanded more. It had to be true. And it wasn't. He smiled sadly and raised his hands, let them fall. I thought I could see the loss in his eyes. I thought I understood. He said, "Growing up with faith is like growing up with crutches." "But you threw away your crutches and walked?" "No. I threw away my crutches and fell flat on my face. All the strength had gone into the crutches. I had none of my own. I was 19 when it finally all fell apart for me. The end of adolescence is the perfect age for an existential crisis, don't you think? You've left yours awfully late." My face burned with humiliation. Michael reached over and touched my shoulder. He said, "I've had a long shift, my judgment's slipping. I'm not trying to be cruel." He laughed. "Listen to me, spouting season for everything bullshit, like the Edenites meet Il Duce. Get those emotional trains running on time." He leaned back and ran a hand through his hair. "But I was 19, there's no getting around it. And I'd lost God. What can I say? I'd read Sartre, I read Camus, I read Nietzsche." I winced. Michael was puzzled. "You have a problem with Friedrich?" The cramp tightened. I replied through gritted teeth, "Not at all. All the best European philosophers went mad." "Exactly. And I read them all." "And?" He shook his head, smiling, embarrassed. "For a year or so, I really believed it. Here I am, staring into the abyss with Nietzsche. Here I am, on the brink of insanity, entropy, meaninglessness, the Enlightenment's unspeakable, godless, rational damnation. One wrong step, and I'll go spiraling down." He hesitated. I watched him closely, suddenly suspicious. Was he making this up as he went along? A little improvised care for the whole patient routine? And even if he wasn't, we'd had different lives, different histories. What use was any of this to me? I listened, though. "But I didn't go spiraling down, because there is no abyss. There is no yawning chasm waiting to swallow us up when we learn that there is no God, that we're animals like any other animal, that the universe has no purpose, that our souls are made of the same stuff as water and sand." I said, "There are 2,000 cultists on this island who believe otherwise." Michael shrugged. "What do you expect from moral flat earthers if not fear of falling? If you desperately, passionately want to plummet into the abyss, of course it's possible, but only if you work hard. Only if you will the entire thing into being. Only if you manufacture every last centimeter of it on your way down. I don't believe that honesty leads to madness. I don't believe we need delusions to stay sane. I don't believe the truth is strewn with booby traps waiting to swallow up anyone who thinks too much. There is nowhere to fall, not unless you stand there digging the hole." I said, "You fell, didn't you, when you lost your faith?" "Yes, but how far? What have I become? A serial killer? A torturer?" "I sincerely hope not. But you lost a lot more than childish things, didn't you? What about all those stirring sermons on kindness, charity, and love?" Michael laughed softly. "And the least of these is faith. What makes you think I've lost anything? I've stopped pretending that the things I value are locked up in some magical vault called God, outside the universe, outside time, outside myself. That's all. I don't need beautiful lies anymore just to make the decisions I want to make, to try to live a life I think is good. If the truth had taken those things away, I could never really have had them in the first place." "And I still clean up your shit, don't I? I still tell you stories at 3 in the morning. If you want greater miracles than that, you're out of luck." Whether it was genuine autobiography or just a slick piece of ad hoc therapy, Michael's story began to undermine my panic and claustrophobia. His arguments made too much sense to me. They sliced through my self-pity like a hot wire. If the universe itself wasn't a cultural construct, the gray terror I felt from seeing myself as part of it certainly was. I'd never had the honesty to embrace the molecular nature of my own existence. But But then, the whole society I'd inhabited had been equally coy. The reality had always been glossed over, censored, ignored. I'd spent 36 years in a world still infested with lingering dualism, with tacit, dumb spirituality, where every movie, every song still wailed about the immortal soul, while everyone swallowed designer drugs predicated on pure materialism. Oh, there's an ellipsis there. The reality had always been glossed over, censored, ignored. I'd spent 36 years in a world still infested with lingering dualism, with tacit, dumb spirituality, where every movie, every song still wailed about the immortal soul, while everyone swallowed designer drugs predicated on pure materialism. No wonder the truth had come as a shock. The abyss, like everything else, was understandable. I lost interest in digging myself a hole. Vibrio cholerae declined to follow my example. I lay curled on my side, my notepad propped up against an extra pillow, while Sisyphus showed me the mechanics of the process. The B subunit of the B subunit of the collagen molecule binds to the surface of the intestinal mucosal cell. The A subunit detaches and traverses the membrane. This catalyzes increased adenylate cyclase activity, which in turn raises the level of cyclic AMP, stimulating the secretion of sodium ions. The ordinary concentration gradient is reversed, and fluid is pumped in the wrong direction, out into the intestinal space. I watched the molecules interlocking. I watched the merciless random dance. This was what I was, whether it gave me any comfort to understand it or not. The same physics which had kept me alive for 36 years might or might not casually destroy me, but if I couldn't accept that simple, obvious truth, I had no business explaining the world to anyone. Solace and redemption could screw themselves. I'd been tempted by the ignorance cults, and maybe I half understood what drove them now, but what did they have to offer in the end? Alienation from reality. The universe as an unspeakable horror to be endlessly denied, shrouded in saccharine artificial mysteries, every truth subjugated to doublethink and fairy tales. Fuck that. I was sick from too little honesty, not too much. Too many myths about the H word, not too few. I would have been better prepared for the whole ordeal of a lifetime spent calmly facing the truth than a lifetime spent rehearsing the most seductive denials. I watched a schematic of the worst-case scenario. If antibiotic-resistant Mexico City V. cholerae succeeded in crossing the blood-brain barrier, immunosuppressants can limit the fever, but bacterial toxins themselves are likely to cause irreversible damage. Mutant collagen molecules fused with neural membranes. The cells collapsed like punctured balloons. I still feared death as much as ever, but the truth had lost its sting. If the TOE had taken me in its fist and squeezed, at least it had proved that there was solid ground beneath me. The final law, the simplest pattern, holding up the world in all its strangeness. I'd hit bottom. Once you'd touched the bedrock of the underworld, the foundations of the universe, there was nowhere else to fall. I said, "That's enough. Now find something to cheer me up." "How about the beat poets?" I smiled. "Perfect." Sisyphus ransacked the libraries and played them reading their own words. Ginsberg howling, "Moloch! Moloch!" Burroughs rasping, "A Junkie's Christmas," all severed limbs in suitcases and scoring the immaculate fix. And best of all, Kerouac himself, wild and melodic, stoned and innocent. What if the Three Stooges were real? Afternoon sunlight slanted across the ward and brushed the side of my face, bridging distance, energy, scale, complexity. This was not a reason for terror. It was not a reason for awe. It was the most ordinary thing imaginable. I was as ready as I'd ever be. I closed my eyes. Someone prodded my shoulder and said for the fourth or fifth time, "Wake up, please." I'd lost all choice in the matter. I opened my eyes. A young woman stood beside me, no one I'd seen before. She had serious, dark brown eyes, olive skin, long black hair. She spoke with a German accent. "Drink this." She held out a small vial of clear liquid. "I can't keep anything down. Didn't they tell you?" "This you will." I was past caring. Vomiting was as natural to me as breathing. I took the vial and tipped the contents down my throat. My esophagus spasmed. The acid hit the roof of my mouth, but nothing more. I coughed. "Why didn't someone offer me that sooner?" "It only just arrived." "From where?" "You don't want to know." I blinked at her. My head cleared slightly. "Arrived? What kind of drug wouldn't be in stock already?" "What do you think?" The flesh at the base of my spine went cold. Am I dreaming? Or am I dead? "Achille had samples of your blood smuggled out to a certain country and analyzed by friends. You just swallowed a set of magic bullets for every stage of the weapon. You'll be on your feet in a matter of hours." My head throbbed. The weapon. My worst fear had just been confirmed and banished in the same sentence. It was disorienting. Every stage? What would have come next? What have I missed out on? "You don't want to know." I think you're right. I still wasn't convinced that any of this was happening. Why? Why did Achille go to all that trouble just to save me? "We had to find out exactly what you were carrying. Violet Mosala might still be at risk, even though she's showing no symptoms. We had to have a cure for her ready here on the island." I absorbed that. At least she hadn't said, "We don't care who is or isn't the Keystone. We're all prepared to risk our lives to protect just about anyone." So what was I carrying, and why did it detonate prematurely? The young AC frowned solemnly. "We still haven't worked out all the details, but the timing fell apart. It looks like the bacteria generated confused internal signals due to a disparity between intracellular molecular clocks and the host's biochemical cues. The melatonin receptors were choked, saturated—" She stopped, alarmed. "I don't understand. Why are you laughing?" By the time I left the hospital on Tuesday morning, I had my strength back, and I was enraged. The conference was half over, but TOEs were no longer the story, and if Sarah Knight, for whatever unfathomable reasons, had abandoned the war over Mosala to sit by Yasuko Nishide's bedside incommunicado, I'd finally have to start unraveling the whole complicated truth for myself. Back in my hotel room, I plugged in my umbilical fiber, passed Kuale's 18 mugshots to Witness, and flagged them for constant real-time search. I called Lydia. "I need $5,000 extra for research, database access, and hacking fees. More is going on here than I can begin to describe, and if you don't agree that it's worth every cent in a week's time, I'll refund it all." We argued for 15 minutes. I improvised. I dropped misleading hints about PACDF and an impending political storm, but I said nothing about Mosala's planned immigration. In the end, Lydia caved in. I was astonished. I used the software Kuale had given me to send her a deep encrypted message. "No, I haven't spotted one of your goons, but if you expect any more help from me, beyond acting as a living culture medium, you're going to have to give me all the details. Who these people are, who employed them, your analysis of the weapon, everything. Take it or leave it. Meet me at the same place as last time in an hour." I sat back and took stock of what I knew, what I believed. Biotech weapons, biotech interests? Whether or not that was true, the boycott itself had almost killed me. I'd always seen both sides of the gene patent laws. I'd always been equally suspicious of the corporations and the renegades. But now the symmetry was broken. I had a long history of apathy and ambivalence, and I was ashamed to admit that it had taken so much to politicize me. But now I was ready to embrace technoliberation. I was ready to do everything I could to expose Mosala's enemies and help her cause. The Beach Boys never lied, though. I couldn't believe that a weapon from Ingenuity and their allies would have failed because of anything as simple as my distorted melatonin cycle. That sounded more like the work of That sounded more like the work of brilliant, resourceful amateurs making do with limited knowledge, limited tools. PACDF? The ignorance cults? Hardly. Other techno-liberateurs who decided that Mosala's original scheme would greatly benefit from a Nobel Prize-winning martyr? Unaware that they were pitted against people who largely shared their goals, but who weren't merely averse to treating people as expendable, but who had elevated the sacrificial celebrity in question to the status of creator of the universe? There was an irony there, somewhere. The cool, pragmatic, realpolitik faction of techno-liberation seemed to be infinitely more fanatical than the quasi-religious Anthrocosmologists. An irony, or a misunderstanding. Kuale's reply arrived while I was in the shower, scouring away the dead skin and sour odor I'd been unable to remove in the hospital bathroom. The data you insist on seeing can't be unlocked at the place you've specified. Meet me at these coordinates. I checked a map of the island. There was no point arguing. I dressed and set out for the northern reefs. And that is where we will leave it for today. Yeah, these are winding up being a bit shorter than usual, but that's A-okay. More installments, more fun. We'll still be done by the end of the month. At which point we should be starting Cytine by CJ Cherry. We will stream more tomorrow. We will continue reading through Distress until it is done. And, yeah, as before, we will move on after that. Hopefully people are enjoying. The plot has truly thickened. The stakes are real. They are T-bones or ribeyes. Big steaks. Juicy ones. Spiced and seasoned to your pleasure. Anyway, that's where we'll call it. Brain, go away. Brain not make good word good. Brain make word bad. Brain not know how make end thing. So Frag say usual spiel of stay safe, stay sane, be toasty or cool as per your preference or geolocation permit, and be decent to each other. Until tomorrow. Toodaloo. And stuff.